So, Maestro Perlman, welcome. As always, when you come, it's a reunion, it's a
I
homecoming
feel the same way.
for
I feel
all
the
of
same
us,
way, yes.
whether it's with the fiddle or as conductor. For at least 20 years now, you've been conducting
Oh
this.
my goodness. Yeah, conductor, yeah, about 23 years. About 23 years, yes. Yeah.
Now, before we start, I
Yes.
want to tell you that my very reliable sources say that yesterday you received some items of great sentimental value.
Yes, when I was 12 years old, I played for the great violinist Yehudi Menuhin. And I'm sure he came to Israel many, many times to play with the Philharmonic. And, after I played for him, the thing that I asked for him was, can you send me an autographed photograph? Uh, and, um, and I remember waiting for this photograph at my home, not too far from here, by the way. It was on Hakalir Street. It was near the zoo, which does not exist anymore, and near my school, which just does not exist anymore. Everything has changed. Anyway, every day I was waiting for the postman, and finally it arrived, and that was the picture. I don't know. I have it someplace, but the person actually had a copy of the inscription that said to the young violinist, may he be wonderful and have a good future, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very sentimental.
I imagine.
Yeah, yeah,
And it
yeah.
was-
And as it happened, just by coincidence, the violin that I play on right now belonged to Yehudi Menuhin.
Really?
And I bought it from him, and that was obviously later.
In what year? In
In
72 was he?
1714, the Stradivarius is 1714. Yeah.
Well, and we don't want to know how much it's worth.
No, you don't want to know.
Does
how much
anyone know?
Neither do I want to know how much it's worth. No. It's all I can say is that because of my teaching, I see how lucky we all are, the older folks, to be able to afford to buy a violin of the level of a Stradivarius or Guarneri. At that time, we're talking about 1970 or 80, because right now it's totally impossible because of the price. So right now, I know a lot of my students, sometimes they play for me, and then I want to show them, and I usually don't bring the violin to show. I don't show, but every now and then I have to. So I pick up their violin and I play, and then I get so much admiration to them, because I said to myself, how can they make this horrible violin sound so good?
Really?
Because
So
they play on an absolutely horrible.
you think a lot of them
something.
are hindered by what they're using?
I don't know if they're hindered, but I know that they produce whatever they can produce, and sometimes I say I wish I could make them play on my violin just to give them an idea. But then I said no, because if I do that, they will never play on that violin again. That they will know, because that's what happened to me. The first time when I met Menuhin, not the first time actually, the second time when I was older, and I asked him what kind of violin you play on, and he showed me the Stradivarius, and I asked, could I try it, and he let me try it, and it was the most emotional experience. It was so amazing, and I dreamt about it, and I was lucky to be able to actually at one point to buy it from him.
Now, you mentioned your students. When did you actually start teaching?
Oh, I started to teach 30, 40 years ago. I started very early on. I always say to my students that the most important thing, apart from obvious practicing and so on, is to teach, because it gives you a certain perspective on listening to music, which is so important for your own playing. And I think that for me, I find that the teaching has really helped very, very much the way I play, and the way I understand about music is because of the incredible necessity to actually hear with a certain ear what people are doing, especially even people who are, especially people who are really talented. Then what do you say? Like conducting, it's the same thing. It involves listening, and then you hear what you want to see, because when you conduct orchestras that are wonderful, Israel Philharmonic, for example, is a fantastic orchestra. So what do you say to them if you conduct a Brahms symphony, which they have done so many times? So what do you say? Well, you try and identify how you hear the music and what you want, what's your sort of your way of doing it. It's not a question of wrong or right. It's a question of that's the way I hear it. Sometimes they would play it the way other maestros hear it, and sometimes I go there and I conduct and I say, I don't know, I hear a sound in my head that's a particular sound, and that's what I'd like the orchestra to play. And it's the same thing with teaching as well.
In these three areas that you have affected so much, and they're very direct, the sound of the violin, the sound of the orchestra's playing, and of course the hands-on mentoring of students and so on. Which do you feel reaches, I don't know how to put it, the deepest level, or which do you feel the most satisfaction from?
Well, I look, the thing is that every aspect of what I do musically has its own sort of highlight. Obviously, when you play, I've been playing all my life, and so there's a certain kind of control that you have to have, and so on. When it comes to conducting, the control varies. It's a different kind of control. It's almost like, how can I suggest with what I do on the podium for the orchestra to play the way I like it, the way that I hear. And of course, the teaching, it's the same thing. What do you do verbalizing to the student the way it does? Now, all of these three things that we're talking about, they all help each other. I find, that one helps the other. And and of course, in the final analysis, what it does for me is to keep me really enthusiastic about music at the age of 71. Still enthusiastic about music after doing it all these years. That's the most important thing, is to not do something all of a sudden and say, oh, I've done that before, so what do I do now? It keeps the interest going, and that's, for me, is the most important thing.
Well, that just seems to be part of you. It seems like you were born with that.
Yeah, well.
Now, there are other areas other than the musical ones that you have been involved in for quite some time, and I know nothing about that, but I do know that you've been an enormous fundraiser for us at the IPO, among other things. Can you tell us something about that?
This orchestra, I don't know if probably a lot of people know about this story. When I was about 10 or 11, I wrote a letter to the administration of the orchestra, and it was a letter written, I think, as a matter of fact, I may have a copy, because they gave me a copy several years ago of the letter that I wrote to them in, but it was 1956 or 57, and the letter was very formal. It says, I hereby request to audition to play with the Israel Philharmonic as soloist. I have the following pieces of repertoire ready to play, and so on and so forth. So I wrote this letter. So it was always my dream. By the way, they never answered me. But
you're still waiting.
No. But anyway, so it was my dream to play with the orchestra of my country. The first time I heard it, obviously, was on the radio and so on. So when I grew up and I started to play concerts and so on, this was, and the first time that I came back to Israel to play with the orchestra, I believe it was maybe 1966 or 67, if I'm not correct. They probably know better than I do. It was like coming back home. It was like playing with family. And of course, playing with Zubin Mehta was something that was always an amazing experience. I remember first meeting Zubin was, he actually was supposed to come to my wife's and our wedding, and he missed his plane coming from Montreal, I remember at that time. And so we've known each other. My wife and I have been married for 50 years, so I've known Zubin for 50 years. And of course this orchestra, as I said, it's like mishpoche, it's like family. So I'm always so happy to do whatever I can to help the orchestra, because that, it's one of the great representations of music of the country of Israel. And this orchestra is such an international, they travel so much, I don't have to tell you. So it's always a great pleasure for me.
tell us right now, what are your activities, not directly playing, conducting, or teaching, but what are the activities that are closest to your heart now, the big projects?
Well, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you. It's still conducting and teaching and playing. You know, those are the activities. I also, you know, every now and then there is always the opportunity to help organizations in general and people in particular with disabilities, because, you know, I contracted polio when I was 4 years old. So, you know, disability is something that's not exactly unfamiliar to me, and so on. So every now and then I start to get impatient with stuff that goes on that is not fair to people with disabilities. So I try to raise my voice and support organizations. I was just now the recipient of what they call it, the Genesis Prize. And, you know, the Genesis Prize, they call it the Jewish Nobel Prize. And the reason they call it the Jewish Nobel Prize is, unlike the real Nobel Prize, the Jewish Nobel Prize, you get the money, but you have to give it right back to charities. So you have to, you know, you don't get to keep the money. It's you know, you have to do it. It's not a question of if you would like, you can do it. So right now I've been faced with the challenge of who to give the money to, and as a result, there were lots of organizations that applied, and I got to really know a lot of wonderful, interesting organizations that not only deal with music, but deal with problems of people with disabilities, and so on. So it's one of the things that I try to do.
Now you have to tell us about playing at the, was it the Mets or the Yankees? You played the national anthem?
Well, yeah. Well, they ask me every now and then. They ask me to do that. I don't think I'm going to do it again, because every time I did it twice and I played it and they lost. So I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I should not do that. You know, I want them to win. But anyway, it was a lot of fun to play in a stadium with, you know, 40,000 people, you know, playing the national anthem and so on.
And you got a very good comment on Facebook. Someone added below the video, there's a lot going on between this man and his violin, as I think we've noticed for years.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Now, I sat next to you at a master class 45 years ago, and I was speaking about this a few months ago with a lady who's a professor of music at Harvard, who was also there. And the things that you said about violin technique had so much influence on me as a hornist. Even I felt freed by some of the things that you said, the approaches that you suggested, and this was in 1972.
What did I say?
Well, specifically, you talked about having big pudgy fingers that you in the high register they were wider than a half step.
That's right.
And that you had to devise some way to move them out of the way. And I thought, my goodness, I thought that people who could do what Perlman can do were born perfect. So this inspired me.
No, you have to adjust. You have to adjust.
That inspired me. And the other thing you said was that you didn't like to practice and that you had to make yourself do that by discipline. Also inspiring, since the rest of us suffer
Well,
from
the discipline, I tell you, the discipline came from my parents not letting me off the hook and telling me, you got to practice, you know. And
Really?
Yeah. You know, my parents were not musicians, but they knew one thing. They had to hear me play. You know, if they heard a noise, if they had sound, then it means that it was okay. But they didn't exactly know, so I had to devise things to practice to keep myself occupied and sort of, you know, get the time going, and so on. So because the discipline, young kids, you know, they don't have a lot of discipline. You know, they need their parents to push them, or their teacher, and so on. So that's what I did. But right now, you know, I think that I do this. I tell the same to my students. I said, if you can practice with lots of thought, thoughtful practicing is much better 1 hour than 3 hours of just thoughtless practicing, and so on. And that's all. You know. And you can always tell if somebody is an organized practicer or not. But you know, every now and then you need your parents to help you. Because when you are 8 years old, 9 years old, you don't have the discipline.
How did you deal? More than one of your children became musical, as we know.
My children. Yeah, that's right.
And how did you impart that to them?
I did not.
The
I did
discipline?
not. The thing to do. I did not push them at all. I did not push them. None of my children are violinists. You know, I have a daughter who's, you know, she plays the piano and she's wonderful.
She's been here with us.
She played, yeah, here with Philharmonic. And I have another daughter who is a very talented singer, but chose not to do that as a profession. You know, she's a social worker, and she sings whenever she wants for pleasure, and then she sings really, really very beautifully. And then one of my sons, I have two sons. One of them is a pop singer who loves to do that, and the other one is smart. He's a lawyer, so he's the only one who does not do anything musically. And then I have one more daughter who played the flute and decided not to do it, and she's now a teacher and so on, and a mother and so on. So but 4 out of my 5 children have been sort of exposed to music and so on, and so they enjoy it. But only one, I suppose, right now is actively playing. But again, I did not push. As a matter of fact, one of my daughters wanted to play the violin, and I said to myself, "Oh my God, what's going to happen?" And then I said, "Go ahead, play it." And after a while, she quit on her own. I tried to teach her and so on. And but my thing is, don't say anything. You know, if your children want to do something in music, why not? But I'm not going to push. I'm not going to push.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Our daughter plays a little bit of piano, and
Yeah.
she's quite quick with it. But I really...
Let's see what happens, you know.
Exactly. Now, what are your plans with us in the future? What repertoire are you thinking about for us?
I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. Right now I'm doing a wonderful program, doing Brahms 3, which is not done that often if you compare it to the other symphonies, because, you know, it finishes quietly and so on, and I suppose a lot of conductor would rather finish the program. But this orchestra is such a musical orchestra, you know, the way they play is so wonderful. So I'm doing this and overture to Berlioz's Roman Carnival. Then we're doing Egmont, Bruch Concerto, Prokofiev Concerto with a wonderful violinist, Ilya Gringolds.
You're a student years
Yes,
ago, yes?
yeah, he studied with me, and he said, a fantastic fiddle player, wonderful. So there's a lot of fun, and let's see what happens in the future. We don't have any plans, but I'm sure something will happen.
Well, you've done so many programs with us.
Oh, a lot of programs and recordings and so on. So I've done a lot of stuff.
I remember the recording you did with Ilya, with Gringolds.
That's right, we did Shostakovich and Tchaikovsky concertos, absolutely.
Well, and that's on your fingertips, I see, and that was at least a dozen years ago.
Yeah, a lot of stuff. I even remember the first time I played this particular piece, the Prokofiev Second Violin Concerto, and the conductor was Sergiu Celibidache, who came to Israel, and he was a frequent guest in Israel. So that's the first time that I played that piece, was with him, and it brings back wonderful memories. All right.
Do you have now another question or two that I should ask?
What's for lunch?
No, I'll answer that.